Um, Situation that is improving right now for the New Orleans Saints, Tyler. They're getting their quarterback back, and that's Derek Carr. And Derek Carr coming back does wonders for this entire offense, especially a player who has struggled and that was drafted. And I think you and I talked about potentially avoiding him in the second round, and that's Chris Olave, who was drafted. I mean, he was being drafted as like a top 12 to 15 receiver. He's been a
Top
massive
12.
disappointment this year.
Mm-hmm.
He's struggled right now to stay healthy and even stay on the field. And it's one of those things where sometimes the quarterback makes a big difference, but I think the situation also makes a big difference. Like he looked better
Yeah.
last week, obviously, with Spencer Rattler getting benched, Jake Hayner coming in. But with Derek Carr, he's going to be a completely different receiver.
Mm-hmm.
Are you buying Chris Olave? Because it seems like after everything that's happened this year, there might be a silver lining here for him.
Yeah, I would have been buying weeks ago personally with Chris Olave because I don't think there's any question that Chris Olave is a good wide receiver. He's very good. And people were kind of hating on him even when Rashid Shaheed was healthy. But like you go back and look at it, week one, I mean, they completely blow out Carolina. They even blow out Dallas the next week, but he puts up 3 games of 80 plus receiving yards in 3 straight weeks, right? Dallas, Philly, Atlanta. And then I think Derek Carr gets hurt against Kansas City. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he gets hurt against Kansas City. And then he just kind of falls off. And last week has 100 receiving yards last week. And now with Rashid Shaheed, I mean, we've already known this, but with him out for season, I just think this consolidates the targets so much for Chris Olave, for a guy like Alvin Kamara going forward. I don't like Derek Carr. I don't think he's that great, but he's better than what they've been playing with right now. And I just think this is very good for Chris Olave, where he's another guy. I mean, I keep kind of saying it, but like wide receiver 2-ish range, I would say back in wide receiver 2, kind of, same with Lad McConkey, but a guy that's been proven. We know that he's good, so it's not just one good game. I think that he can have a lot of good games. So he's somebody that I would also be actively trying to. I'd rather have him over Lad, but another
Yes.
guy that I think going forward has quite a bit of upside. I wouldn't say wide receiver 1 numbers. I don't think that he can be there, but solid wide receiver 2 numbers the rest of the way.
The hard part with Olave is that whoever has Olave is probably thinking like he's going to be back to wide receiver one. Like I think that's one
Yeah,
of
I
the
don't think
things
that you
too.
could. Yeah,
He's a tough player probably to get, and I wouldn't have recommended getting him because who knew what the season was going to
I
look
would have
like for
said
the
you missed
Saints
the
team.
opportunity. I think he became, and I said this, when the video, Rashid Shaheed, once he got hurt, he became the buy. He was an absolute buy kind of guy. I think
I
that
think
the door's
especially
closed.
once it's well, especially now that we know Derek Carr is back, it makes things easier to palate. Like seeing him on the field, it was tough once he got that concussion. But I think you're right because you talked about how like people were hating on him with Shaheed. It was like I'm gonna be honest, Shaheed was the better receiver. I think he's still rated like Shaheed's still rated as like a top 30 receiver somehow.
Yeah,
But
I mean, he was catching the big, but
he
Olave wasn't. The thing is, Olave wasn't bad when Shaheed was like he
nobody
was
said
good.
I don't think he's bad. I think it was just who was performing, who was
Yeah,
outperforming. I think they
exactly.
both had their times.
Yeah,
And Olave is a receiver who like I think we know what he is when he's the main target. It looks exactly like how it did last season, where he's going to be a top 15 to 20 ish guy. We'll
hmm
probably not see huge volume, but we'll have opportunities deep. He's going to have, those 100-yard games. He'll probably not have, probably have 4 or 5 touchdowns on the
yeah.
season, somewhere
That'll be the
around 80
biggest
catches.
problem. Well, just the
That's the main thing with him.
that's
Is
wide
just
receiver 2 numbers.
he doesn't have the upside. So, but I
Yeah,
think if you can trade for him right now as a wide receiver 3 or whoever is kind of panicking, like, and doesn't have
yeah.
him in that range, like you said, I would use Marv right now to go get Olave and another player. And I think that's very attainable right now.
I think the biggest problem, like you said, will just be the manager. Even like your casual managers, like they drafted him high, they liked him, they've held on to him. The situation's changing for better. I just he'd be a player that just will be hard to acquire. It'll be hard to acquire him right now.
I think you could get crafty though, because if you try to just go get him
I
straight,
well, what
you
about
if
this?
you if you try to go get him straight, I think you would have an issue. Like I think if you were just like, here, give me
Absolutely.
these 2 players for one. But I think if
Or
you can put him in a deal, in a 3 for 2 type deal or a 3 for 3 type deal, I think it would be easier for whoever has him to be like, shit, maybe I'll move off of him.
I would say kind of the flip side. This could potentially be a good sell high opportunity as well, where he's a wide receiver too, but I also think that there's some other players that maybe aren't universally recognized as solid wide receiver twos going forward that you could piece in Olave with the name Olave and then another piece and get like a
Give me an example of what you're thinking. Like, give me an example of a trade you're thinking.
like I would say I think that you could probably like I think majority of people, especially with how he's been playing, 100% want Chris Olave over a guy like Jalen Waddle, right? I would say people would absolutely do that. So you could potentially get like Jalen Waddle. And I know this is disgusting. I know this is disgusting, but hear me out. You get Jalen Waddle, who could potentially be as good as Chris Olave down the stretch. Maybe, Tua starts playing better. And you could probably get like an Alexander Madison, which I know that sounds disgusting, but Alexander Madison is a 70%, opportunity share kind of guy that could be a back in RB2 for the rest of the way. And you're not, honestly, I wouldn't be shocked if Jalen Waddle and Chris Olave at the end of the season, for the rest of the season, finish right next to each other in total points.
I would be very shocked at that.
I wouldn't be shocked.
I'd be shocked at that. I think Jalen Waddle's too inconsistent right now.
But Jalen Waddle's been a stud when he's played. We know what Jalen Waddle is. We've seen him long enough.
Yeah.
This is like a bad little stretch of games he's gone through. Who's to say next week against Buffalo, when everybody's going to sit him, he doesn't have 100 yards and a touchdown catch like that?
I think we can get that out of Olave this week easily.
Exactly.
No, but I think that's a much 100%. Easier path than Jalen Waddle.
But Chris Olave and Jalen Waddle literally have been the same player last year. They were the same player.
Yeah, and a lot of what
nothing's changed.
But Waddle, a lot of what Waddle, no, they weren't the same player last year. Waddle was outside of the top 20. I want to say Chris Olave was in the top 20 last year.
Yeah,
I also want to say that when Waddle had his best games, it was when like Tyreek missed that 2-game stretch, and I think he inflated his numbers during that time. He had like 200-yard games back to back towards the end of the year.
Okay, so Jalen Waddle last year averaged 14.2 fantasy points per game.
Okay,
14.2. Chris Olave last year, hold on, it has to load. Hurry up.
Probably 16, 17.
I'll say he averaged 15, probably.
That sounds about right, too.
Last year, he averaged 14.5. Literally the same player. And I know it's disgusting, and people will look at Alexander Madison and say, ew, gross. But this is a workhorse running back. And this is what I'm saying. Like, you're essentially getting two of the same players in the community is going to be way higher on Chris Olave than Jalen Waddle. And guess what? Jalen Waddle's already had his bye. So you're getting a player that you don't even have to worry about the bye week going forward anymore. His quarterback's being healthy. He's been disappointing this season because his quarterback's been hurt. And then you get another workhorse running back on top of that, who I know people are not going to like, but he's a workhorse running back. We know how valuable these guys are, especially down the stretch, where I just think it's kind of like
I go aim higher. If that's the deal for Chris Olave,
sure.
Then I'm saying that 9 times out of 10.
I think that you could aim a little bit, but I think that if you're going to start to aim higher is when you're going to have to do now you need to do a 2-for-1 kind of deal, where I think this is a great case for a guy that you could get a 2-for-1 for a guy like that.
I think if you put in, you know what I'm saying, like if you're going to move for Olave, it's got to be like a guy, like I think you should use one of the assets that kind of came to you for free, like a DeAndre Hopkins if you picked him up, plus another stud like a running back, J.K. Dobbins. You throw J.K. Dobbins and DeAndre Hopkins in a deal. I don't know if the Olave person's
like
doing
Chris
that.
Olave, you're saying?
Yeah, for Chris Olave, like that's the kind of deal I'm doing, or a Cedric Tillman and maybe like a Chase Brown. Like I'm trying to use pieces that like don't really that in deals like that where I'm getting a player who probably is more a wide receiver 3 on my team than wide receiver 2. I'm trying to give up pieces and like keep Jalen Waddle. So I'm trying to give up pieces that like are fringe players on my bench, but then I look at my opponents and they're like, ooh, I could start one of those guys for sure. One of those guys could be in my starting lineup. And I think like Chase Brown's the type of piece that I would use in a deal like that. Tyrone Tracy, I would probably use him like maybe a straight 1-to-1 deal to go get Chris Olave, things like that. Like that's how I play the game, is I kind of like up my floor a little bit, even if I give somebody a little bit more upside.